This episode of Bullet Heaven was made with a copy of the game provided by Armor Game Studios. In Bullet Heaven number 94, all the way back in 2014, we took a look at Vlambeer's Luftrausers, an intense, procedurally generated dogfighting shoot-'em-up that was so good international travel was undertaken just to play it again while it was in development. The final release was well-structured, infinitely replayable, and offered incredible challenges and rewards to those able to complete its myriad objectives. Between the PlayStation 3, Vita, and PC versions, we definitely got our fill, but we still play it even today, with a steering wheel. Hell yeah. But where to go next? Well, we might just have the answer. Jet Lancer is a horizontal, omnidirectional shooting game developed by Codewakers and published by Armor Games on May 12, 2020. Jet Lancer saw release on both PC and the Nintendo Switch and offers what could be a much more robust gameplay experience than Luftrausers did in 2014. But does it really? Let's take a closer look. At a glance, there are a lot of similarities between Jet Lancer and Luftrausers, but they are fundamentally different from a gameplay standpoint. To start, the controls aren't exactly what players familiar with Vlambeer's title might expect. In this review, we're playing with and describing the control of an Xbox-style analog controller. However, all of the controls we'll be taking a look at have keyboard inputs as well. Players move their plane by holding down the right trigger for thrust and pointing it in the direction they want to travel with the analog stick. So long as the engine is engaged, the player will move in the direction the stick is held. This is known as shooter-type banking. Disengaging the engine will allow the player to coast on their inertia, while still being able to gradually change the direction their aircraft points. This allows for a fair bit of strategic maneuvering, but comes off as quite a bit more rigid than Luftrausers as a result. Players can also invert the Y-axis to make it feel, well, okay, it feels wonky to be sure, but the player's jet behaves a little more like a real one. Holding down will make the plane ascend, while holding up makes it plummet to the earth. Thankfully, a second mode known as arcade-type banking changes the controls to a more familiar Luftrausers style, letting players turn their jet left and right only, with their thrust keeping them moving. Arcade banking allows for much faster, sharper turns and maneuvering, but takes a fair bit of discipline and skill to use, especially at lower altitudes. We're sure some players will prefer shooter-type, but for our money, it's arcade all day. For a boost of speed, or to make a sudden stop, players can deploy an afterburner with the left trigger. Afterburners can be used in a variety of ways to assist the player. Turn radius tightening, hovering, dead stops, right angle turns, you name it, and the afterburner is likely going to be able to facilitate it. Enemies can even get caught in the jet exhaust, which can damage or even destroy them if used at just the right time. Players shoot their primary weapon, a minigun with a rapid shot, with the A button. The player's fire will have a decent range to it, allowing for targets to be hit beyond the visible screen area if players are careful. Different weapon systems can also be unlocked, which can change the minigun's power and effective range. There are going to be a whole whack of bullets and enemy attacks to contend with, but players aren't defenseless. A dodge roll can be executed with the X button. Not only can players avoid certain death with the touch of a button, avoiding an enemy or their attacks at just the right time will briefly enable a more powerful shot to counterattack with. If a player is hit though, it's not the end of the road. Players have a total of 3 hit points before their fighter flies apart in a trail of smoke and flame. This cannot be restored either. Once damage is sustained, it will remain until the stage is completed. This is in stark contrast to Luftrausers, in which the player's health recovers by flying without shooting. Another way to really dish the pain in Jet Lancer's skies is by way of special weapons fired with the left bumper. Several different weapons can be unlocked, including active homing missiles, passive rockets, and proximity explosives, which can deal some seriously heavy damage when they connect with an enemy unit. Each shot has a brief cooldown before they can be fired again. However, it goes further. Holding the left bumper will charge a secondary special attack. Barrages of missiles, super lasers, giant bombs, and more can be deployed in this manner. Typically, the longer they are charged, the more powerful, faster, or longer lasting they will be. A significant cooldown is required before they can be used again, though. As more stages are completed, additional modules will become available for players to outfit their fighter. Accessed on the main map by pressing the Y button, only a certain amount of these can be enabled at once. 1 special weapon, 1 charged weapon, and up to 4 enhancements such as increased afterburner, decreased charged weapon cooldown, Shields, ground collision avoidance, missile countermeasures, and much more can be outfitted to the player's fighter. While vaguely reminiscent of Luftrausers, this setup is very different with its own unique quirks, and the player's jet will not change in appearance when they are equipped. All of this comes together to allow players of any skill to make decent progress in Jet Lancer with a little practice. Of course, we found the core controls to be a little impractical, so we changed the special weapons in charge to Y and the dodge roll to B instead. Combined with arcade banking, this setup allowed us to make quick work of our opposition. Being able to rebind any of the controls in this game with the option to fine-tune the analog dead zone in both the PC and Switch versions should allow for any player to find an ideal and comfortable setup. Which is good, because unlike Luftrausers' single procedural stage, Jet Lancer takes place over the course of a massive 39 stages. Like other shooters with a large amount of single stages such as Bang.io and Assault Android Cactus, each stage is self-contained and often has one of several different objectives. All of the mainstays are here, complete with enemy destruction whether by waves or all at once, dedicated target destruction, escort missions, target defense, enemy suppression, electronic warfare, target score, and more. Jet Lancer does still incorporate randomly generated targets outside of actual boss units, so each stage will feel ever so slightly different every time the player enters it. It's all paced fairly well, though some stages can be a bit on the cheap side, especially in the case of target score missions or when being overrun by swarms of enemies in the suppression stages. All of these missions are accessible from a 3D World hub in which players pilot their carrier to the next sortie. New missions open up over time as more and more are completed in a pseudo-non-linear fashion, often culminating in an epic boss battle against a crazy huge mechanized target. The boss battles in specific are actually a lot of fun. They make the sometimes tedious regular missions more than worth enduring. In actuality, there aren't a ton of things to actually complain about in Jet Lancer. The control and gameplay are pretty much the kind of thing that is overcome with a bit of practice. The only real complaint we have is the vagueness some stages exhibit with regards to performance and progress. For example, in the suppression stages, there's nothing to say exactly how many enemies result in a mission failure, or how long a player has to fix things. There are other issues that will be explained in the scoring section as well, but again, on the whole, Jet Lancer is still a ton of fun to play. 39 stages is quite a bit of game, but Jet Lancer also features true last boss conditions for multiple endings and a more difficult New Game Plus mode. In New Game Plus, players take on more robust opposition using the weapons unlocked in the regular campaign, and it's definitely designed to test Jet Lancer experts. Jet Lancer leaves a bit to be desired in its scoring. During gameplay, there are no indicators with regards to points tallied or bonuses obtained. The only stages with a score per se are those in which a target score needs to be reached. And even then, hitting those numbers can be tricky to do without knowing how to boost the player's numbers mid-mission. Super hard to do with nothing being shown in terms of numeric indicators for multipliers, bonuses, and per kill scores. But at the end of any given stage, criteria for score based on the mission in question is laid out and can be expanded upon to give players an idea of how to improve. Each stage has a letter grade associated with it, and reaching the best grade, S+, requires knowledge of combos, which are never shown, counters, which are not tallied mid-stage, weapon type, which will award more or less points depending on the one used, accuracy, which reduces points if players are always firing without hitting a thing, and time taken to finish the stage, which some stages kind of forces zero score in. In the case of bosses and electronic countermeasure missions, only the time a player takes is considered. Once again, it's all very vague, but basically players want to be able to dispatch enemies constantly while triggering as many counters as possible. The ultimate objective, therefore, is honing the player's skill to allow for an S+ rating paired with a perfect no-hit run. This transforms the S+ rank into an ace and changes the cleared mission marker from gray to gold. In repeat stage attempts after an initial clear, a real-time rank will be displayed to give players at least a somewhat better idea of how the run is progressing. But we really wish there was at least a combo counter or a per-enemy score shown when players kill off a unit. We get that this is a narrative-heavy campaign and all, but if a score is involved, we kind of want to be able to see it, and see it all as it happens. There are also, unsurprisingly, no online leaderboards in Jet Lancer, but this isn't really a game that is structured for that sort of thing. With scores only really contributing to a finite ace result, Jet Lancer is more about a perfect completion than a high-score chase. Jet Lancer sure is a step up from Luftrausers in terms of its presentation. While the vantage point and general animation is very similar, the aircraft, ship, tank, and boss designs are vastly different than Vlambeer's outing. Take, for example, the core visuals. Full color, highly detailed, and complete with 3D plane perspective and all kinds of parallax in its 2D elements. Jetlancer sports an immediate difference in flavor and personality compared to the sepia and red Luftrausers. Sure, the turn animations may not be as smooth, but the added aircraft details more than make up for that. Some of the backgrounds here are simply incredible too. Impactful, colorful, and diverse with all kinds of giant busted machinery all over the place. There's never really a dull visual moment in Jetlancer. And that's not even to mention the smooth 3D hub sections, and the boss encounters are definitely something else. On the sound front, there's nothing that works in an adverse way here. The sound effects are all great for their applied purpose with no irritating effects to speak of. The music is also just as fitting, with a C64 style undertone to the guitar-heavy hard rock soundtrack. While it isn't exactly our cup of tea, the BGM still definitely works, and it works well. The UI here is also simple but effective, and the HUD is actually pretty clever. Found in the middle of the screen, it displays remaining afterburner, special weapon status, and altitude in a minimalist, effective manner. But we can't talk about presentation without talking plot. Jetlancer features a decent, well-written story that tells the tale of mercenaries, military pilots, air pirates, and ancient mysteries. And for once, it was pretty enjoyable, talking cats and all. But now for the elephant in the room. The PC version is all well and good, running at a silky 60 frames per second, but what about the Switch version? We've taken a look at a lot of games on PlayStation 4 and PC in the past, and the Switch versions were less than optimal. But in this case, pound for pound, the Switch version of Jetlancer looks, performs, and plays just like its PC counterpart. The only concession is that the visuals are just a bit jaggier than the PC version. It's kinda rare to see a modern game like this without major concessions to make it run well on the Switch, but here we are. 60 frames per second, sharp control, super portable. Granted, the Steam version also has a set of achievements, giving it just a smidge more replayability. So, how does Jetlancer stack up? Let's take a look. Jetlancer sports all kinds of control options, but the one closest to Luftrausers works best for us. This game is a decent challenge on its own, but the New Game Plus option takes it to an extreme level. In terms of length, with 39 stages, New Game Plus, and even true last boss conditions, Jetlancer is sure to keep players engaged for hours on hours. Jetlancer looks fantastic, taking the general vantage point of Luftrausers and injecting it with all kinds of details, atmosphere, and fantastic backgrounds. Sound-wise, nothing changes up or remixes the soundtrack this time around, but what is here is still pretty good. The structure of Jetlancer is fairly basic since there's a huge emphasis on the story. Anything innovated on with regards to weapon loadouts and gameplay unfortunately gets cancelled out by poor scoring feedback and vague failure and success conditions in some stages. For about $15, players are sure to get their money's worth with the huge amount of content that Jetlancer sports. So, Jetlancer? It's not Luftrausers, but that's actually a good thing. This is a polished, fun game with a ton of exposition, great visuals, and exciting, fun gameplay. Whether on the PC or the Switch, Jetlancer delivers the goods, and it gets a 4.5 out of 5. You can get a copy of Jetlancer for about $15 on Steam or the Nintendo eShop today. Up next, we're finally revisiting a Technosoft classic with the Sega Saturn version of Thunder Force 5. We're also making a solid push to finish up the 7th Shooting Game Chronicles, coming soon.
Be sure to like, comment, and of course, subscribe. We finally got a copy of Hyperduel for the Sega Saturn and we'll be reviewing it once we hit 10,000 subscribers.